Right, so this is an emergency alert. Please pay attention because I'm going to be explaining today why every country is evacuating their citizens from Israel as fast as they possibly can. What you're seeing behind me here is a map of Israel and its respective nuclear facilities, which extend all the way up to the north, close to Lebanon. One of the primary ones of importance is this Dimona nuclear plant, where apparently this is where their nuclear weapons program is based out of. Now, I'm quite certain that there's a lot of classified information that we don't know about their nuclear program. I highly doubt that their nuclear weapons are stored there. I'm sure they're in some deep underground military bunker somewhere else. However, there was a skirmish in this location recently. Now, this video, this animation that you're seeing behind me, was published on a media channel associated with Hezbollah, essentially making threats towards Israel's nuclear facilities. Anytime we're in modern war with a nuclear power, we always run the risk of nuclear power plants becoming entangled in the conflict. Of course, we've seen this at Chernobyl. We've seen this at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant in Ukraine. Israel is a much smaller place. And of course, many of these facilities are in range of rockets of Hamas and of course Hezbollah, which can target effectively all of Israel. Now, the only potential protective factor here, which might prevent this from happening, is the blowback to other surrounding countries, which may be aligned with the Lebanon, Syria, Iranian axes, okay? And of course the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So if there was some sort of incident at these nuclear facilities, it's very likely that the blowback would flow right into the West Bank. Now, I don't know if when Israel created these nuclear facilities, if this was part of the plan, if this was strategic in some way, shape, or form, but this is just something to keep your eye on, because indeed, there's a reason why every single country right now is evacuating their citizens, except the United States. Take a look at this. Australia could use military flights to evacuate people from Israel. They actually canceled their commercial flights due to fear of flying there, apparently. German Air Force to evacuate citizens from Israel tonight, and they're doing this quick, guys. India, several other countries evacuating citizens from Israel. I'm going to tell you why they're doing it so quick in just a moment. Please bear with me. First evacuation flight with Ukrainians on board, evacuating Tel Aviv. Japan, Turkey, okay, all of these places, hundreds from Jersey Shore stranded in Israel amid a slow and costly evacuation. Now, you have to ask yourself, why on earth is the United States, who is surrounding this place with military equipment, okay, they're sending F-15s and reinforcements into Jordan, which has a very, very large pro-Palestinian population, but also a pro-Palestinian population. There is a risk of the monarchy there being overthrown and upended by the population in some revolt, should they not in some way try to sympathize with the plight of the Palestinians, okay? You have aircraft carriers. Another one is inbound. That's a definite thing. So we went from no aircraft carriers to 2 aircraft carriers in a week, and I believe they're even considering rerouting some stuff from the Persian Gulf, just in case this situation explodes. Now ask yourself this, why is it that every single Western country is evacuating their citizens as we speak, yet in the United States, they still have a level 3 advisory, okay? So let's just check out the advisory for, it looks like we got a 404 error here. No, yeah, 404 error. Either way, Israel right now is a level 3 travel advisory. Level 4 is do not travel. That's what you would want at this point in time, is a do not travel, much like Syria, much like the Gaza Strip. So if you take a look at the Gaza Strip, this is a do not travel, you probably can't read that, travel advisory. Okay, this shows you all this State Department map, just to be clear, shows you every single travel advisory in the world with their respective embassies and consulates, whether or not they're active. Every adversarial country is obviously in red, or has been an adversarial country in the past is in red, or maybe in the future, like Russia. very likely. Okay, so we're starting to see this inconsistency. Why is the United States, who is descending on this country with weaponry, lots of weaponry, why is it that there is not a level 4 do not travel advisory yet? Is this not to spook the population of both Israel and the United States with respect to what is about to happen? Why is there only a level 2 advisory in Lebanon where it's saying reconsider travel, okay? So this is a level 2 advisory. So, you might run into some complications. And why is it that the West Bank, of all places, which is Palestinian-controlled territory, is at a lower security risk than Israel itself? Now, is it because of the rocket bombardments? Is it because the risk of targeting one of these nuclear plants? Here's what's going to happen in the next 48 hours, okay? So what we know right now is that there's been a flood. Flash floods are quite frequent in this region. Tel Aviv was flooded today. Obviously not all of it. This is what the government is showing. This is their justification for not going into this war zone in Gaza yet, that the ground invasion has been postponed for a couple days, they're claiming. Seymour Hersh, the highly decorated and exalted journalist, has claimed that what they're going to do, and this guy's intel is pretty good, I must say. He's basically saying that they're going to level the place with JDAMs first, these large bombs, and then they are going to go in there and do a ground invasion thereafter. And they're going to throw a bunch of tunnel rats into the fight because, of course, Gaza is ridden with hundreds of miles of subterranean enclaves where fighters are going to be fighting from. So it is going to be a very difficult situation, according to some military analysts. So this is what's going to happen once this water clears up. Some people think that this is just a stalling tactic that they're using because they're not ready, or perhaps they're scared to go in there, or whatever the case. I don't know. But what we do know is that all the countries of the world are starting to evacuate their citizens, knowing that this thing is going to blow up real soon. So they know that a greater war is about to go down in this region. And what does this mean for the rest of us? I've never before seen such a, when we were talking about the Russian-Ukraine war for the last 18 months, the risk of nuclear escalation continues to escalate by the day, sky high, okay? But a lot of the people who are coming out now and saying this is World War III, yada, 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 they weren't talking about that in those terms then. Now, why would they be talking about that in those terms now, when the only person in this region with nuclear weapons is Israel and the American aircraft carriers that likely have nuclear capabilities as well? Could it be because Iran actually does have nuclear weapons and has not disclosed it yet? Could it be because, of course, there is no more nuclear deal, even though, according to the surveillance of the International Atomic Energy Agency, whoever regulates that and oversees that program, they haven't violated the nuclear enrichment yet. So, but you don't know if the Russians have worked with them, have the North Koreans worked with them, has there been some sort of agreement made with Russia and the Iranians that the Russians would come to their assistance? Now, if there was that, you would think that they would be open about that, because a part of nuclear deterrence is the deterrence component. So Iran would want the world to know that Russia had its back, and there has been no official agreement made that if Israel nukes Iran, that Russia is going to come to Iran's aid, or that there's going to be a nuclear superpower on the other side. So why all this concern about World War III? Well, it's probably because if anybody is crazy enough to use nuclear weapons, it's probably going to be the Israelis. For the reasons I laid out at the beginning of this video. Number one, there are already people within the Israeli government openly calling for the use of nuclear weapons, so to get ready for it, minimize casualties. Remember, back in World War II, there was an argument that was made for the use of nuclear weapons that this would minimize human casualties, because then the United States would not have to go and fight the Japanese from island to island, and in doing so, there'd be all kinds of collateral damage and many more people would die than there would be in a nuclear explosion. So there are actually some people, and there's been people who floated this idea in Russia as well as of recent. We'll talk about Russia in just a minute, because the Russians haven't been doing many airstrikes lately, and that has some people concerned that they're conserving that for when this shit starts to go down. Now, what was I talking about? Yes, Israel using nuclear weapons. So if Israel was concerned, if they get into a war with Hezbollah, the disadvantage that nobody is talking about, and everyone says, well, Hezbollah doesn't have nuclear weapons, and I just said, Hamas doesn't have nuclear weapons. Sure, but Israel on its own territory has ticking time bombs called nuclear power plants. Now, if a person was really insane and really just wanted to get whatever they had coming to them in the afterlife, or whatever they believe coming to them, they might try to target one of these nuclear facilities. Now, we know that nuclear facilities are fairly well fortified, but Hezbollah has some serious firepower. According to some military analysts, a fight with Hezbollah is not something that the Israelis are conventionally prepared to fight, which is why you have all these carrier strike groups now coming to their support in the Mediterranean Sea. So are they crazy enough to let a few bombs rip on these nuclear facilities? Is there a possibility that they are very concerned about fighting spreading over into greater Israel, which is why they're arming the civilian population? There is a very high probability that this situation gets drastically out of control and very quickly. You know, we all think of these things in linear terms, okay? This is the tendency when you're looking at any potential developing crisis, is everybody makes the mistake of looking at it linearly when we should be looking at it exponentially. It could be that we are only right here, right now, and on a linear, if this was a linear progression of events, okay, it might not escalate for some period of time. But if one of those nuclear facilities gets hit, and Israel believes that its country's existence is under threat, they will use nuclear weapons. We're talking about a country who's willing to level a megalopolis, I guess you'd call it a metropolis, that was, that contains 2 million people. They're willing to level that, completely level that, irrespective. We've seen the kill ratio differential over the years. It highly favors Israel in a 10-to-1 ratio. So we know that they're willing to go the distance. Would they be willing to drop a nuke somewhere? Maybe not a populated civilian place, but maybe just somewhere to send a message, to send a point. I think if anybody would be willing to do that, it would be people who are openly calling for it within that government. Now, I think that some of those people are fanatics, and I don't think that they're necessarily going to be dignified in their requests, but you just never know at this point in time. Things are just getting wildly out of control. What I don't understand, and I'll say again, I don't understand how a lot of these pundits who right now are calling for World War III over this, maybe they know something I don't. Many people disagree that if Iran gets into this conflict, which apparently they are because they are issuing recruitment notices for people within their own country, if Iran gets involved, that Russia is going to immediately come to their aid with nuclear weapons. Well, there's problems with this, okay? Number one, they don't have that level of military agreement between the two countries. It's very similar to the mistaken belief, I think, that let's say if one of the Baltic countries gets attacked, or even if Romania has had drones fall on it, as it has in recent nights, that immediately Article 5 will be invoked, and all of a sudden we would go to nuclear war with the Russians over one of these smaller eastern countries who makes up a small portion of the overall NATO GDP. It's very unlikely. Now, Syria perhaps is a more strategic alliance for the Russians, that they may be willing to incrementally engage in Israel, with Israel, in a direct war about. But it's still difficult to say. This is still a proxy war. So if anyone's going to use a nuclear weapon, it's going to be the Israelis. The problem is that as soon as the Israelis use a nuclear weapon, or the United States uses a nuke in their defense, people are going to lose their frickin' minds. And in their use of nuclear weapons, every other country's nuclear DEFCON readiness level goes to the maximum, to the absolute maximum. Because, of course, there are all these overlapping alliances. So the risk then, and maybe this is why a lot of the pundits believe that World War III starts here in the Middle East. Perhaps this is just the final flashpoint, the linchpin that will make all of those other conflicts flare up to their maturity, which of course means mushroom clouds. Maybe that's what people are concerned about. But until these squares turn red, that's when you know that shit's going to go down. Unfortunately, we're seeing this massive inconsistency. The United States has all its military equipment, but it's not issuing calls to evacuate all its citizens. It's not declaring Israel a do not travel advisory yet, whereas many other countries have. Perhaps they know what's coming. They haven't even done this with Lebanon yet. So something fishy is most definitely going on here. Why is the world so suddenly transfixed on this small little sliver of land? I will tell you, compared to days gone by, there is much more pushback than we've ever seen before from pro-Palestinian elements across the Western world. Now, part of this is due to the fact that you have a much greater population of Palestinian people. So this is one of those videos. This was in London today. Every single major city has had massive protests in support of the Palestinians, not Hamas. Maybe there are some, extremists out there who take that approach, but the large majority, you would have never seen something like this 15 years ago. You would have been way on the fringe if you advocated for the human rights of people in the Gaza Strip. Now, this is different, and this is why precisely this could push us into World War III. And the West, ironically, brought this on themselves, because the previous wars kicked a hornet's nest, created this massive refugee crisis. There was this inundation of Islamic people into Western nations, now comprising a sizable portion of those populations, and now you're getting this collective pushback that you probably wouldn't have gotten, 20 years ago. You definitely wouldn't have gotten this 20 years ago. And this is why the situation is even more volatile. You're starting to see the forced crackdown. You're starting to see laws being put into place. You're starting to see police skirmishes. This is like Black Lives Matter level of, George Floyd protests that we could possibly see. That whole day of rage thing, that was just the kickoff point. That was the inflection point for what now will be a very, very contentious issue. And this is actually not good for Israel in the grand scheme, in the long scheme of things. And maybe this is why Netanyahu's popularity, in spite of his taking a very aggressive approach and forming this coalition government, this emergency government, in spite of everything that he's doing now, he still has a very low approval rating amongst his people due to the supposed intelligence failures, okay? So this situation has the potential to go very, very bad, very, very quickly. Is it going to bring Russia to the brink of nuclear war with the United States? I don't know. I do know, and I've said it before, that in the United States bringing its military assets into the Eastern Mediterranean, they're effectively bringing them closer to Turkey and the Black Sea. Now, my main man Shadow over at Twitter, who's been sending me all kinds of cool, he's one of these flight radar enthusiasts, if you will. Well, he's been tracking some stuff, and apparently some recon planes, I'm not sure if you can see this, but have gotten very close to Sevastopol. In the past, when they've gotten this close, they've either been chased out by the Russians. The one drone was brought down when it was this close. Sometimes they're going to turn their transponders off, but if they do that, then they're likely going to get shot down if they're detected by the Russians. So they usually leave the transponder on. But notice how this was just a quick, in and out, meaning that they're probably planning something, okay? If it was that important that they got that close, or perhaps they were hoping that the Russians wouldn't notice, or I don't know exactly what they're planning, but we cannot take our eyes off this, because I still believe that a lot of what we're seeing going on in Israel right now might be a diversion away from the much broader war which is happening here in Russia. Right now in Russia, they're forming a cauldron in Avdiivka, and it's just south of Bakhmut. Okay, so the Russians have been engaged in a massive ground campaign that you're not even hearing about. I mean, if this was happening in Israel right now, it would be all over the news. The scale of this current offensive, they're trying to basically surround Ukrainian forces. A lot of Ukrainian forces in here still fighting in this Avdiivka place, which I believe is on the same size and scale as Bakhmut. Maybe not as much of a population, but still the same size. So we still have a lot of stuff going on there. Now, people are concerned that the Russians, because they haven't been engaged in airstrikes recently, are saving their missiles up for winter to take out Ukraine's critical infrastructure in winter. And I think that it probably has something to do, and it's probably coinciding with what's going on in the Gaza Strip. They know that at some point things are going to heat up to such an extent in the Mediterranean, in and around Israel, and that's when they're going to completely unload on Ukrainian military targets and begin to exhaust their air defense. And let's just appreciate for a second, no matter what you say about the Russians, you have to appreciate the fact that even Bakhmut doesn't look like the Gaza Strip. After all of that fighting, okay, even Bakhmut doesn't look like the Gaza Strip. Yes, it's been completely leveled, but you still didn't see, and maybe it's because of the way the buildings are built in the Gaza Strip. They don't have steel. They might not. They probably don't, and it's probably just cement. It's probably not steel frame buildings. But that's something to be mindful of, is you have to appreciate the level of discretion that the Russians have been using and the level of restraint that they've shown in not committing to collateral damage and at least trying to be surgical. Now, obviously, many civilians have died. I'm not making apologies for that. I'm just saying, comparatively speaking, in the last week, we've seen immense amounts of destruction. I think more civilians killed than the entirety of, maybe not, maybe let me walk that back, but a much higher proportion of civilians killed in the conflict in Israel than we've seen throughout the entire Russia-Ukraine war. And that's a high casualty rate war with a massive attrition rate on both sides in the hundreds of thousands. So we're seeing serious developments here, and it appears as though this could culminate in the coming few weeks. So I would encourage people, get squared away if you haven't yet. Obviously, if you've been watching this channel, you're beyond squared away. So you have nothing to fear except fear itself, as the saying goes. But I would encourage people to just remember, just keep in mind that if there is a nuclear incident in Israel, it is going to trigger worldwide panic. And that panic could be what creates other incidents around the world, other conflicts from flaring up. Countries might see this opportunistically, as in a chance to, once the United States is preoccupied. Some people think that the Russians and the Iranians fomented all of this business in order to take attention away from their own conflicts, and maybe this is going to compel them and embolden them to move deeper and deeper into their respective war theaters, much like the Chinese into Taiwan. You just never know right now. But I talked to a lot of people got a bad feeling about what's coming, and I must second that notion, because it does appear as though that big moves are being made. Among those big moves is the apparent unification of the Muslim world. Sunni Shiites, the Saudis and the Iranians. If the Saudis and Iranians team up, Israel is in big, big, big trouble, okay? Because the Saudis have a lot of money. Of course, there are still American bases in Saudi Arabia. I do believe there's still a few American bases, but all of those American bases, I guarantee you, are in the crosshairs of Iranian missiles, and they will likely be laid to waste in the first phase of a conflict. There was a military exercise conducted in the early 2000s. I believe it was Operation, it was a military exercise. It simulated a war with Iran. It's very well known about. They spent like it was a lot of money that they spent. I think it was over $1 billion, okay? Something challenge. But anyways, what they found in that is that the American military was defeated in that war game. And typically you would want to impress, typically a lot of these things are done in order to impress the military and the politicians to embolden us to press on into uncharted territory and to go to war with countries for the spoils of war. But in this case, we were defeated, and by a wide margin, asymmetrically, but also with symmetrical forces with, and this was back 20 years ago. Iran has advanced a lot since that time. For all we know, they have nuclear weapons. So this actually could backfire on the Israelis and the Americans in a big, big way. And this could just be the beginning of the end of the American empire. I mean, we've been saying the beginning of the end of the American empire for some time, but this really could be it. Because if we get smoked in the Middle East, which we could, because, like I say, there's a lot of very intelligent military analysts that I respect that say that the capabilities of Hezbollah should not be underestimated. It's probably part of the reason why, and this is historically as well, Israelis got into fights going into the Gaza Strip before in the past. They've never went in with such a heavy hand as they are now, so things might be different. But if you get Syria, if you get people from Iraq, people from Iran, volunteering for this kind of thing, which it appears there is people volunteering from Iraq. Iran's state broadcaster urges people to volunteer for war against Israel, okay? So the shit's getting ready to go down. They're even claiming to have hypersonic missiles. This is a missile and this is a billboard in Tehran, I believe, Tehran, the capital of Iran. And it says something to the effect of, to Israel in 400 seconds, all right? So this is a long-standing enmity that has to be resolved at some point. Israel's talking about utilizing their Jericho nuclear missile system, Israel's potential nuclear doomsday option. And you're going to start to hear more and more about this when they invade the Gaza Strip. If they start getting their asses handed to them, which they may or they may not. They may just be very casualty averse and just blow up every little thing that moves in the rubble. If that's the case, then it's going to take them a lot of weapons, but they'll probably not have nearly as many casualties. And of course, that will kick off worldwide protests, worldwide resistance. That is going to lead to extremist acts around the world. It's going to cause more police state crackdown. We all know Justin is just frothing at the mouth, just waiting for some sort of incident to justify controlling the media even more. And I'm quite appalled at a lot of conservative media groups out there right now who are calling for the media to be censored in the way that they are, which is just, it's completely counter to what, we've been fighting for the last 3 years. And to see people just calling for the, the blanket censorship of anybody from that point of view and the firing of news anchors. It's just stupid because, and this is why I never jump into either of those baskets, because I know it doesn't matter, conservative, liberal, people who are hardline anything, they will censor you when it serves their interests. That's what I've found over the years. And the problem is that if you empower the government to do that when it's in your interest, when the tables turn, it will be used against you. Okay? So just don't complain when it gets used against you, is all I will say. Russia is moving to cancel ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. They're going to start nuclear testing again. It's a guarantee. They're going to start nuclear testing. So is the United States. So is China. We're entering a brave, dangerous new world here, my friends. USA says North Korea delivered 1,000 containers of equipment and munitions to Russia for the Ukraine war. 1,000 containers. That's a lot of frickin' artillery, man. A lot of artillery. Guys, this is World War III. This is World War III, okay? I think I touched on everything I wanted to touch on today. Just to reiterate, another nuclear-powered and likely nuclear-armed aircraft carrier strike group headed by the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and consisting of one Ticonderoga-class cruiser as well as 3 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers just left Norfolk, Virginia today. Will be heading to the Eastern Mediterranean to link up with the carrier strike group that's already there. So the shit's going down. Stock up while you can, and remember, things could spiral very fast. What is that old saying? What is that old saying? They say, I think it was Lenin who said this, and people are going to call me a communist because I quoted Lenin. But it was Lenin who said, you can have decades where there is almost no change, and then you can have a day where there's decades of change. And this is the exponential function of these types of events. Look at what happened to gold. Everybody was worried, oh no, gold is losing. Gold, oh, this is crude oil, sorry. This is crude oil. But gold went up like something like 10% in just the past week. I mean, what is that telling you? The price of oil skyrocketing again. This is why I tell people, do not worry about the price of gold. If anything, the price of gold is artificially suppressed in a big way. And when the whole house of cards collapses, anybody holding precious metals, anybody holding preps, anybody holding non-perishable food items, you're going to be king. Just make sure you have a way to defend it. And we have videos coming up on how you can do that. All right, so stay safe, everybody. And remember, don't succumb to this idea that, oh, it's a day of rage and, now we can just be complacent again. No, we have to be on high alert from here on in. This doesn't mean Islamophobia. This doesn't mean censoring anybody who, wants to support human rights violations around the world. Just because, Hamas commits these terrible, heinous atrocities, these war crimes that are deplorable, doesn't mean that we shouldn't hold ourselves to a more civilized standard and extend people human rights and respect. But it's not just going to end in a day. If you're in a public place, you need to absolutely watch your six, all right? And apparently there's still nuclear sniffer planes in and around. Everybody's saying, oh, it's around India and Mumbai. No, they're worried about Pakistan, because Pakistan is the only nuclear-armed Muslim nation. And perhaps they're a little bit worried. Maybe they're worried about collusion of Pakistan and Iran, or God knows what. But if you wanted the makings of a world war, it's right here. So for all you trolls out there, I hope that you are secretly prepping in the shadows, my friends. Take care. See you in 24.